The guitarist smiled and gave the moment space to breathe. Amy stood from the piano bench, microphone in hand, staring at the woman she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. They were both different people now. 3 years of growth, pain, learning, healing. But something between them remained unchanged. "What are you doing here?" Amy whispered into the mic, her voice barely steady, not breaking eye contact with Beyoncé. "What I should have done years ago," Beyoncé replied, her voice carrying across the festival grounds with that trademark strength and vulnerability combined. They stood 10 feet apart on the massive stage. Two artists who had shaped a generation, surrounded by darkness except for the single spotlight that now illuminated them both. The crowd had gone quiet, sensing they were witnessing something deeply personal and historically significant. Amy's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she said, the words barely audible over the crowd but picked up by the sensitive stage microphones. "I was stubborn. I was hurt. I was—" Beyoncé shook her head and stepped closer, her own eyes glistening. "We both were. We both said things. We both let other people speak for us when we should have been speaking to each other." The band kept the song alive with a gentle instrumental vamp, sensing this was bigger than any rehearsed performance. Amy's guitarist, who had watched her struggle with the isolation the feud had caused, smiled and played softer, giving the moment space to breathe. Back to Black transformed into something entirely new. Amy's grief-stricken original merged with Beyoncé's powerful runs, creating harmonies that neither artist had ever attempted before. The song became a conversation, a reconciliation, an apology sung in front of 60,000 witnesses. Amy reached out first. Beyoncé met her halfway. They embraced on that stage, two small figures against an enormous backdrop, while the festival ground erupted in the loudest cheer of the weekend. When they pulled apart, both were crying. Amy laughed through her tears, shaking her head at the impossibility of the moment. "Your team called my team," Beyoncé explained, speaking quietly into her mic. "Said you might need a friend tonight." Amy looked toward the wings where her manager stood, giving her a thumbs up. She turned back to Beyoncé, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've missed your voice," Amy said. "I've missed yours more." They finished Back to Black together, then launched into Crazy in Love with Amy on piano and Beyoncé leading vocals. The crowd lost their minds. This wasn't on the schedule. This wasn't planned or promoted or processed through management companies. This was two artists remembering why they fell in love with music in the first place. After 45 minutes of improvised duets, covers, and spontaneous arrangements, they took their bows together. Amy grabbed Beyoncé's hand and raised it above their heads. The festival crowd gave them a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. People were crying, cheering, recording, trying to capture something that felt too big and beautiful to be contained by any device. As they walked off stage together, Amy's legs felt shaky. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the emotional weight of what had just happened. 3 years of anger, hurt, and stubborn pride had dissolved in 45 minutes of shared music. Backstage, they found a quiet corner away from the chaos of crew members and equipment. They sat on road cases, sharing a bottle of water that someone had pressed into Amy's hand, both emotionally drained and somehow lighter than they'd felt in years. "I read about your recovery," Beyoncé said quietly, her voice different now, private, meant only for Amy's ears. "I wanted to reach out so many times. I started writing texts and deleting them. I asked mutual friends about you, but nobody wanted to get in the middle." "I wouldn't have answered anyway," Amy admitted, pulling her knees up to her chest. "I was angry at everyone back then, especially people who were right about things I didn't want to hear. And you were right about a lot of things." "I wasn't right about everything," Beyoncé said, shaking her head. "The sample thing, that was business people making art decisions without consulting the artists. I should have called you directly the moment my team brought it up. I should have said, 'No, we figure this out between us, not through lawyers.'" Amy nodded, feeling the relief of finally having this conversation. "We let lawyers talk when we should have been talking. We let business ruin something that was never about business in the first place." "Never again," Beyoncé said, extending her hand. Amy took it, feeling the warmth of real friendship for the first time in years. "Never again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the festival continuing around them. She was at the peak of her fame and simultaneously drowning in the depths of her personal hell. Back to Black had made her a global star, but stardom felt like being trapped in a glass box, while the world watched her suffocate. Every headline was about her problems, her struggles, her tumultuous relationship with Blake Fielder Civil. Every photograph caught her at her worst moments, as if the paparazzi had developed a sixth sense for human vulnerability. The weight of constant scrutiny had become unbearable. She couldn't walk down the street without someone shouting her name, couldn't grab coffee without ending up on a gossip website, couldn't even have a breakdown in private. Fame had become a prison where the bars were made of camera flashes and the guards were journalists looking for their next story. She needed to disappear, needed to become anonymous again, needed to remember who she was before the world decided who she should be. Her manager, Ray Cosbert, had suggested Seattle during a particularly difficult conversation about her future. "Go somewhere nobody expects you," he said, watching her pace around his office like a caged animal. "Take a week, clear your head. Remember why you started singing in the first place." Amy arrived at SeaTac Airport on a gray Thursday morning, wearing oversized dark sunglasses and a vintage leather jacket that had belonged to her grandmother. She moved through the terminal with the practiced anonymity of someone who'd learned to hide in plain sight, keeping her head down, her distinctive beehive hair covered by a black knit cap. She checked into a small boutique hotel in Capitol Hill, the kind of place that catered to musicians and artists rather than tourists. Her room overlooked the city, all glass and steel and endless gray sky that reminded her of London, but without the suffocating familiarity. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. She spent her first day walking the streets where grunge was born, where music had meant something different, where authenticity had mattered more than marketability. The neighborhood still carried traces of its musical legacy in the form of vintage clothing stores, independent coffee shops, and record stores that looked like they'd been there since the 70s. On her second day, she found Sonic Boom Records. The shop looked exactly like the kind of place that would have shaped a generation of musicians. Cluttered, authentic, run by someone who cared about music more than profit. Amy wandered the aisles, running her fingers along vinyl spines. Marcus recognized her immediately but said nothing. He'd learned that famous people wanted to be anonymous sometimes, wanted to just exist without performance. Amy spent an hour in the store, eventually bringing a Billie Holiday record to the counter. "Good choice," Marcus said as he rang up the sale. "She knew about pain," Amy replied quietly. Marcus paused. Something in her voice, the way she said it, reminded him of something. Then it clicked. "You're Amy Winehouse." Amy tensed, ready for the fan reaction, the request for photos, the whole performance. Instead, Marcus reached into his cash register drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Someone left this for you," he said. 13 years ago." Amy stared at the paper. "What?" "Kurt Cobain, April 1994. He heard your demo tape when you were a kid. He said when you made it big and came to Seattle, I should give you this." Amy's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the note, the paper feeling fragile and precious, like it might crumble if she handled it too roughly. The handwriting was distinctly masculine, slightly messy but readable. The letters formed with the casual urgency of someone writing down something important before the thought could escape. She read the words once, her eyes moving slowly across each sentence, as if she were translating a foreign language. Then she read them again, this time hearing Kurt's voice in her mind, imagining how he might have sounded saying these words aloud. The third time she read the note, tears had begun to form in her eyes, blurring the ink slightly, but not enough to obscure the message. "Pain that turns to music is rare. You have that gift. Don't let the pain destroy what makes the music possible. The world needs voices like yours. Don't let them silence you." Hey. The words hit her like a physical force, knocking something loose inside her chest that had been tightly wound for months. Someone had understood. Someone had seen the connection between her suffering and her art, had recognized that the two were inseparable, that her pain wasn't just something to be cured or hidden, but something to be transformed. And not just anyone. Kurt Cobain. the man who had defined authenticity for an entire generation, who had turned his own anguish into songs that had changed the world, who had understood the terrible weight of being a vessel for other people's emotions. She looked up at Marcus with tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, not caring that she was crying in public, not worrying about how she looked or who might see her vulnerability. He, he heard me sing when I was 11? Said you were going to be huge. Said you had something real. Amy read the note a third time. Pain that turns to music is rare. You have that gift. Don't let the pain destroy what makes the music possible. She folded the note carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. Thank you, she whispered. Amy left the store without another word. She walked back to her hotel room and sat on the bed for 2 hours, holding Kurt's note, reading it over and over. That night, she called her producer. I want to record something, she said. Tonight. She went to a small, dimly lit studio in Belltown called Sound City West, a place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s, and was perfect for that reason. The engineer, a soft-spoken man named David who promised not to tell anyone she was there, set up a simple arrangement. Just Amy, an upright piano, and a single microphone suspended from the ceiling like a metallic spider. She sat at the piano bench and played the same song 47 times, each version slightly different, each attempt searching for something she couldn't name, but would recognize when she found it. Sometimes she played it slower, letting the pain seep into every note like honey through warm bread. Sometimes she played it faster, as if she could outrun the hurt through sheer velocity. Sometimes she stopped in the middle and started over, frustrated by her inability to capture what was living in her chest. The studio was completely silent, except for the sound of her voice and the piano keys. No traffic noise from the street, no hum from air conditioning, nothing to distract from the raw transmission of emotion from her heart through her hands and voice, into the microphone that would preserve this moment forever. David sat behind the mixing board, watching her work with the patient attention of someone who understood that great art couldn't be rushed, that the best recordings happened when artists were allowed to excavate their own truth without interference or judgment. Finally, around 4 a.m., when Seattle was at its quietest and most honest, Amy found what she was looking for, the version of Back to Black that would become legendary, the one that would make people stop their conversations in coffee shops when it played, the one that would soundtrack 1,000 heartbreaks and recoveries. It had the slight crack in her voice during the bridge that betrayed her vulnerability, the moment where pain and hope fought each other in her throat and neither won completely. It was the recording where you could hear her breathing between lines, where the piano bench creaked slightly as she leaned into the emotional climax, where imperfection became more beautiful than any polished studio version could ever be. Later, Amy would tell interviewers that Seattle had changed something for her. She never mentioned the note, never mentioned Kurt's words, but people close to her noticed a shift. She still struggled, still fought her demons, but there was something different in her music after Seattle, a sense of purpose alongside the pain. Marcus never told anyone about the note until after Amy died in July 2011, at the age of 27, joining the infamous club that already included Kurt. Then he felt the story needed to be told, needed to be shared as a reminder that artists see each other across time and space, across genres and generations, across the noise of fame and tragedy, and the endless machinery of the music business that often crushes the very spirits it claims to celebrate. Kurt saw something in that 11-year-old girl's voice, Marcus said in a rare interview years later. He saw talent, but he also saw danger. He saw someone who felt things too deeply, who would turn that feeling into art, but who might not survive the process. The note wasn't just encouragement, it was a warning, and maybe, for a little while at least, it helped. The note itself disappeared after Amy's death. Some say her family has it. Others believe Amy destroyed it. Marcus thinks she kept it with her, folded in whatever jacket she was wearing. A reminder that someone had heard her voice before the world had. Someone had understood what she was carrying. Someone had believed she could survive it. Two voices from different times, different places, different struggles. Connected by pain that turned to music. By the understanding that some people feel everything at once. By the hope that feeling everything might be a gift instead of a curse. Kurt Cobain heard Amy Winehouse when she was 11 years old and knew she would change music. Amy Winehouse received his message 13 years later, and it changed how she thought about her gift. Neither of them survived their pain, but their music survives, and sometimes that has to be enough. Sometimes the most important conversations happen across years, across continents, across the silence between one broken heart and another. Sometimes understanding comes too late to save anyone, but arrives just in time to create something that will outlive the pain that created it. In a small record shop in Seattle, a handwritten note waited 13 long years to deliver a message from one legend to another across the void of time and tragedy. The message was so powerfully simple. Your pain matters, your music matters, you truly matter deeply. The world lost both of them too soon, two brilliant lights extinguished before their full stories were finished, before they could find peace with their gifts and their pain. But for one night in Seattle, in a cramped recording studio while the city slept around her, Amy Winehouse heard Kurt Cobain's words echoing in her mind and turned her pain into something that would last forever, something that would comfort other broken hearts long after her own had stopped beating.